My wife cheated on me with her lawyer, and when I escaped from them and started a business, they came back and, using my wife's cancer as an excuse, tried to beat me. Several years ago, I made a major change in my life, moving from the place I once called home, a place that used to feel like paradise. It's funny how the things you cherish can become sources of pain. I left everything behind, heading to a small town in search of a fresh start. I didn't have a plan, just the need to escape from what my life had become. When I first arrived, I was completely lost, just wandering through unfamiliar streets, wondering what was next for me. That's when I stumbled upon a quiet little bar that would eventually become my favorite spot. Around that same time, I bought a gas station and garage. It had been for sale for a long time, and the owner was practically giving it away. The place was run down, but I saw potential. It felt like a chance to start over. I figured if I could make it work, it would be my way of rebuilding. I put my heart and soul into renovating the place. I upgraded the gas pumps, adding pay-at-the-pump features, which made things easier for customers. I also expanded the store, turning it into a decent-sized convenience shop visible from the gas pumps. These changes turned the place into a local hotspot, especially after the town's grocery store closed each night. The gas station became a 24/7 operation. The convenience stores stayed open around the clock, and the garage was open during the week, with me taking on special projects on Saturdays. It didn't take long for the community to start relying on my store as their go-to spot for late-night essentials. In a small town like this, word spreads quickly. Before I knew it, the gas station was always busy, especially from 7 p.m. to midnight when the local grocery store closed. Around the same time, I started offering alcohol at the store. It wasn't an instant success, but over time, it became a steady stream of income. People liked the convenience of picking up beer or wine while they filled their tanks, and it became part of the town's weekend routine. We hired a merchandising expert who helped us improve the product placement and increase sales, especially on weekends. Eventually, we had to hire more staff just to keep up with the demand, especially for things like junk food and beer on Friday and Saturday nights. There was one Saturday that stands out in particular. I had spent the afternoon replacing a steering column in an old truck, a job I'd been working on for months. Finding the right part had taken forever, and I ended up having to custom make some attachments. The truck belonged to a local man whose family had been driving it since the 1940s. He was determined to keep it running no matter what. If it were up to him, I think he'd want to be buried in that truck. After finishing the job, I headed to the bar for my usual Saturday night drink. I ordered a double shot of whiskey, a glass of ice water, and a slice of lemon. It was my weekly ritual to unwind after a long day at the garage. Between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. was always my favorite time to be at the bar. It was a quiet lull before the crowd came in. Most of the regulars were having dinner with their families, and the place wouldn't get busy until later when the farmhands came in to blow off some steam after a long day in the fields. Some of them would even bring their girlfriends or wives for a drink and a dance. It was a good mix of people, and I had gotten to know many of them over the years. In the 7 years I had been living in this town, I had built a solid reputation and made plenty of friends. It was the kind of place where people looked out for each other, and if something unusual was going on, you'd hear about it from someone at the bar before you'd hear about it anywhere else. That Saturday felt like any other until they walked in. The woman was my ex-wife's twin sister, and the young man with her, the one who once felt like a son to me, brought back a flood of memories I thought I had buried. It had been years since I last saw him, and the boy had grown into a young man. He was starting to resemble his biological father more and more, a fact that stirred up old wounds I thought had healed. The sight of him reminded me that the truth always has a way of surfacing, no matter how hard you try to bury it. They didn't seem to recognize me, which was a relief. My long hair, full beard, and the weight I had lost since leaving made it easier to stay unnoticed. They showed a picture of me to the bartender, and after a brief conversation, they left. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, glad that my appearance had helped me blend into the background. I sent a quick text message to someone I trusted, letting them know the situation. They're back? I'll be home when I can. About half an hour later, Tom, the bartender, came over and sat down at my table. What did they want? I asked, already suspecting the answer. They were trying to find you, Tom said, looking concerned. They said someone named Willa is dying of cancer and wants to make amends before she passes. Willa, my ex-wife. I took a deep breath, trying to process the news. Did they say anything else? They heard a rumor you were living here and came to see if it was true, Tom explained. They showed me a picture, but I didn't recognize you because of the name they used. Do you know these people? I nodded slowly. The woman is my ex-wife's twin sister. The young man is her son, the one she passed off as mine for years. Tom looked at me, trying to read my expression. Do you think they're being honest about her being sick? I thought about it for a moment. They're probably telling part of the truth, but they're leaving out something important. That family is full of secrets. Tom nodded, clearly sensing the complexity of the situation. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I admitted, but I'll figure something out. Thanks for the heads up. As Tom walked back to the bar, I felt a heavy weight settle on my shoulders. It had been nearly 7 years since I left that part of my life behind, and I had no intention of going back. When I left, I had told them I wouldn't return for at least 7 years, and they had laughed at me, thinking I was overreacting. But I wasn't joking. I was done with all of them. Back then, they had no idea how much I knew. They thought I was just angry over a prank they had pulled, but the real reason I left was far more serious. A few weeks before I walked out the door, I found out that our youngest child wasn't mine. My ex-wife, Willa, had been having an affair with her brother-in-law, and the child I had been raising as my own for years wasn't even mine. That revelation was the final straw. It shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. To make matters worse, Willa and her twin sister, Tammy, had been scheming behind my back for years. They were experts in manipulation, making everything look perfect on the surface while plotting and deceiving in the background. I had even discovered that they had taken out a life insurance policy on me, with a payout of $4 million if I died in an accident. I was living with people who had a financial incentive for me to die. The day I left, they had no idea that I was already packed and ready to go. I had loaded my truck with everything I wanted to take from our house, and I drove away without looking back. I didn't tell them where I was going, and I cut all ties. They never saw me again, and I made sure they couldn't find me. By the time they realized I was serious about leaving, I was in a different state, starting a new life. Now, nearly 7 years later, they had tracked me down, and I knew better than to believe that Willa's illness was the only reason they were looking for me. There was always more to the story with that family. I knew that if they had found me, it wasn't just about making amends. I finished my drink and decided it was time to head home. I left through the back door, avoiding the front in case they were still nearby. I cut through the alley behind the bar and walked a few blocks to where I had parked my truck. As I reached the driver's side door and started unlocking it, I heard footsteps behind me. A man stepped forward from the shadows, and I turned to face him. "You're a hard man to find, Mr. Arthur," he said. I kept my expression neutral. "Who's asking?" "My name's Peter Edwards," he said, extending a hand. "Your eldest daughter, Connie, is my wife." I didn't move to shake his hand. "Connie's your wife?" That could be either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how much she takes after her mother. "What do you want?" "There are some unresolved issues from the past," Peter said carefully. "Things that need to be addressed. If Willa would just sign the divorce papers, everything would be resolved," I replied coldly. Peter looked surprised. "Divorce papers?" I had no idea. I stared at him for a moment before making a decision. "Follow me." We got into our separate vehicles, and I led him out of town, driving for about a mile before turning down a long, secluded driveway. I pulled up in front of a small farmhouse, not far from where I lived. It wasn't my real home, but a place I kept for situations like this. A safe house, if you will. I unlocked the door and led Peter inside, directing him to the office where I kept all the legal documents related to my divorce. "I've got everything you need right here," I said, pulling out a thick file and handing it to him. "These are the divorce papers. I've been trying to finalize it for years, but Willa refuses to sign." Peter looked through the file, his brow furrowing as he read. "I didn't know any of this." "That's because Willa and her sister are experts at keeping secrets," I said. "They've spent years manipulating everyone around them, including their own children." As Peter continued reading, I took the opportunity to study him. He was a well-groomed man in his mid-20s, with sharp features and a confident demeanor. He seemed intelligent and educated, but I wasn't sure if I could trust him yet. For all I knew, he was just another pawn in Willa and Tammy's game. "Do you think Connie knows the truth about any of this?" Peter asked after a long pause. "That's something you'll have to figure out on your own," I replied. "But I have a question for you. Do you really believe Willa is dying of cancer, or is that just another one of their lies?" Peter looked up from the file, his face pale. "Who told you she was dying?" "Tammy and her son were in town today," I explained. "They were asking about me, and that's the story they told the bartender." Peter ran a hand through his hair, looking troubled. "Willa's not dying of cancer. She's living with the lawyer who represented her in the divorce. They're expecting their second child together." I felt a surge of anger. "So it was a lie." Peter nodded. "She asked me to find you so she could start the divorce process. She claims it's because she wants to remarry. Then why hasn't she signed the papers all these years?" I asked. Peter looked down at the file, clearly trying to piece together what was going on. "I don't know. None of this makes sense." The more we talked, the more it became clear that Peter wasn't fully aware of the extent of the deception surrounding him. Willa and Tammy had been lying to everyone, and now the truth was finally starting to unravel. The only question was whether it was too late to stop whatever they had planned. As the night wore on, Peter and I discussed the situation in more detail. It became clear that the twins had been manipulating him just as they had manipulated everyone else. I warned him that this was far from over. If Willa and Tammy had tracked me down, they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. When Peter finally left, I felt a sense of unease settling in my gut. The past was catching up with me, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep running from it. After Peter left, I locked the door behind him and sat down in my office, trying to process everything. Willa wasn't dying, far from it. She was still living with the man who had once been her divorce lawyer, and now they were expecting another child together. The lie about her cancer had been a calculated move, one designed to get to me. The thought of how far they were willing to go made my blood boil. I leaned back in my chair and lit a cigarette, inhaling deeply. My mind was racing, thinking through the possibilities. It was clear that Willa and Tammy weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted. They had tried manipulating me before, using every trick in the book to get their way. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't going to play their game. I put out my cigarette and stood up, pacing the small room. I needed to think, to come up with a plan. I couldn't just sit here and wait for them to make their next move. I knew they were capable of anything, and that included putting my life in danger. The memory of that life insurance policy they had taken out on me all those years ago flashed in my mind. $4 million for accidental death. It was no coincidence that the policy still existed. Willa and Tammy had been planning something from the start, and I was finally beginning to see the whole picture. The longer I thought about it, the more certain I became. They were trying to lure me back, to bring me into a situation where they could control the outcome. They wanted me dead, and they had been building up to this for years. First, they tried to emotionally destroy me, manipulating me into thinking I was the father of a child that wasn't mine. When that didn't work, they tried to financially ruin me. Now, they were taking it a step further. I wasn't about to let them win. The next morning, I woke early, still feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I had a decision to make. Either I stayed hidden, kept my head down, and hoped they wouldn't come after me, or I faced them head-on and put an end to it once and for all. I chose the latter. It was time to confront my past, to take control of the situation before it spiraled out of hand. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed help, and the only person I could trust was Josie. Josie had been a rock for me over the years. She was Willa's aunt, an elderly woman who had seen more than her fair share of betrayal and manipulation in her lifetime. But she was different from the rest of the family. Josie had always been straightforward, refusing to get involved in the toxic dynamics that seemed to define the lives of Willa and Tammy. She had warned me years ago about their scheming, urging me to leave before it was too late. I should have listened to her then, but I hadn't. Now, I needed her wisdom more than ever. I picked up the phone and dialed her number, my hands trembling slightly as I waited for her to answer. "Hello?" came Josie's raspy voice on the other end. "Josie, it's Art," I said. relieved to hear her familiar tone. Art, it's been a while, she replied, her voice brightening. I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me. I could never forget you, Josie, I said. I need your help. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Josie had always been sharp, able to pick up on things quickly. She could sense that something was wrong. Tell me what's going on, she said. I filled her in on everything that had happened in the past few days, the arrival of Tammy and the young man, the lie about Willa's cancer, the conversation with Peter. I could hear Josie's breathing grow heavier as I spoke, her frustration with her nieces evident. They're up to something, Josie, I said. And I don't know what their endgame is, but I know it involves me. Josie sighed deeply. Those two have been trouble since they were kids, she muttered. I should have put a stop to their nonsense years ago. You tried, I said, but no one could have seen this coming. I knew they were capable of scheming, but this is on a whole other level, Josie said. You're right to be concerned, Art. They won't stop until they get what they want, and if what you're saying about the insurance policy is true, you could be in real danger. I need your help to figure out what their next move is, I said. You know them better than anyone. What do you think they're planning? Josie was silent for a moment, and I could hear the wheels turning in her mind. They're going to try to force you into a situation where they can make it look like an accident, she said finally. That insurance policy is the key. If you end up dead, they'll collect millions. But they can't just kill you outright. It has to look like an accident, something that won't raise suspicions. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. That's what I was thinking. They'll try to lure you back, make it seem like they want to reconcile, Josie continued. But once you're there, they'll set up the perfect scenario for an accident. You have to be careful, Art. Don't let them corner you. I won't, I promised. But I need more than just caution. I need to know what they're planning before they can put it into action. I'll see what I can find out, Josie said. I've still got some contacts back in town who might be able to give me some information, and I'll keep an ear to the ground for anything that might give us an edge. Thanks, Josie, I said, feeling a sense of relief for the first time in days. Don't thank me yet, she replied. We've got a long road ahead of us. But if anyone can beat those two at their own game, it's you, Art. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone, feeling a renewed sense of determination. Josie was right. I had to stay one step ahead of Willa and Tammy, and the only way to do that was by anticipating their moves before they made them. Over the next few days, I kept a low profile. I stayed out of sight, avoiding the places I normally frequented, and I made sure to keep my phone on me at all times in case Josie called with new information. I knew it was only a matter of time before Willa and Tammy made their next move, and I needed to be ready. Then, one evening, I got a call from Josie. Art, I've got some news, she said, her voice tense. What did you find out? I asked, my heart pounding. It's worse than we thought, Josie replied. Willa's not just after the insurance money. She's got something else planned. My stomach dropped. What is it? She's been talking to some people in town, trying to get them on her side, Josie explained. She's telling them that you abandoned her and the kids, that you've been hiding money from her all these years. She's trying to turn the whole town against you, Art. I clenched my fist, feeling the anger rise inside me. She's trying to ruin me. She's painting you as the villain, Josie said. She's going to make it look like everything was your fault, that you left her high and dry, took all the money, and disappeared without a word. And when she's got enough people believing her story, she'll set her plan into motion. What's her plan? I asked, my voice tight. Josie hesitated before answering. She's going to stage your death, Art. She's going to make it look like you came back to reconcile, but things went wrong, and you ended up dead. She'll make it look like an accident, just like we suspected. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. How is she going to do it? I don't know the details yet, Josie admitted. But she's been talking to some shady characters, people who know how to make things happen. They'll be the ones to carry out the plan. All Willa has to do is get you in the right place at the right time. I sat down, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. This is bigger than I thought. You need to be careful, Art, Josie warned. If you go back, you're walking right into a trap. I know, I said, but I can't just sit here and do nothing. I have to stop them. You're not alone in this, Josie said firmly. I've got people watching her, and I'll do whatever I can to help you. But you need to be smart about this. Don't let your anger cloud your judgment. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I'll be careful. Good, Josie said, because the next time you see Willa, it might be the last. The gravity of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been preparing for this confrontation for years, but now that it was finally happening, it felt more real than ever. Willa wasn't just after money. She wanted me dead, and she was willing to go to any lengths to make it happen. After I hung up with Josie, I spent the next few hours going over my options. I knew that if I didn't act soon, Willa and Tammy would carry out their plan, and I might not survive. I had to make a move, but I needed to be smart about it. I couldn't just walk into their trap. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the only way to beat them was to turn the tables. If they wanted me to walk into their trap, I would, but on my own terms. I spent the next few days laying the groundwork for my plan. I contacted a few trusted friends, people I knew I could rely on, and I made arrangements for when the time came. I didn't tell anyone the full details of what I was planning, but they knew enough to be ready when the moment arrived. Then, I waited. It didn't take long for Willa to make her next move. One morning, I received a message from her, an invitation to meet. She claimed she wanted to talk, to clear the air and put everything behind us. She said she was ready to sign the divorce papers and wanted to meet in person to finalize everything. It was exactly what I had been waiting for. I replied to her message, agreeing to the meeting. We arranged a time and place, and as soon as the details were confirmed, I set the rest of my plan into motion. The meeting was set for a secluded spot just outside of town, a place where we could talk privately. I knew it was a setup, but I had no intention of playing by their rules. I arrived early, parking my truck out of sight and making my way to the meeting spot on foot. I found a good vantage point where I could watch the area without being seen, and I settled in to wait. Sure enough, it wasn't long before I saw movement. Willa arrived first, her face set in a mask of determination. She was followed by Tammy, who was clearly there as backup. But they weren't alone. A third figure emerged from the shadows, a man I didn't recognize. He looked rough, like the kind of guy who knew his way around a fight. This was it. The trap was set, but I wasn't walking into it blindly. From my vantage point, I watched as they waited, clearly expecting me to show up. I could see the tension in Willa's posture, the way she kept glancing around nervously. She knew this was dangerous, but she was desperate. I waited a few more minutes, making sure they were fully committed to the plan, before I made my move. I stepped out from my hiding spot, making sure they saw me as I approached. Willa's eyes widened in surprise when she saw me, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "Art, you made it." "I told you I would," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Thanks for coming," she said, stepping forward. "I know we've had our differences, but I really think we can work this out." "Is that what this is about?" I asked, my eyes flicking to Tammy and the man standing behind her. Willa hesitated, glancing at her sister. "Of course. I just want to put the past behind us." I could see the lie written all over her face, but I played along. "Then let's talk." We stood there for a moment, the tension thick in the air. I could feel the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on me, but I remained calm. I had the upper hand, even if they didn't know it yet. "What's he doing here?" I asked, nodding toward the man standing next to Tammy. Willa's smile faltered. "He's just a friend. He's here to make sure everything goes smoothly." I raised an eyebrow, letting her know I didn't believe a word of it. "Right." There was a long pause, and I could feel the tension building. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. They were about to spring the trap, but they weren't the only ones with a plan. Just as the man took a step forward, reaching for something in his jacket, a car pulled up behind them, headlights cutting through the darkness. The doors opened, and two figures stepped out, my backup. Willa and Tammy froze, their eyes widening in shock. "You didn't think I'd come alone, did you?" I asked, my voice cold. Willa's face paled as she realized the tables had turned. Her confident demeanor crumbled, and Tammy's eyes darted back and forth between me and the two figures stepping out of the car behind them. The man they had brought as their muscles stiffened, clearly realizing he was outnumbered. It was no longer a trap for me. It had become a trap for them. You really thought I would just walk into this alone? I said, my voice cold and steady. You've underestimated me before, but this time, I came prepared. Willa glanced nervously at the man beside her, as if silently pleading for him to make a move. But he didn't. The situation had changed too quickly, and he wasn't willing to gamble on a fight that wasn't in his favor anymore. He wasn't going to risk it. Not with two men who clearly knew how to handle themselves standing there, watching his every move. Tammy, always quicker to speak than Willa, finally found her voice. What the hell is this, Art? You set us up? She spat, trying to regain her composure. I didn't set anyone up, I replied calmly, keeping my eyes locked on hers. You did that yourselves. You think I didn't know this was a trap? The minute you sent that message, I knew you had something planned. Willa's eyes flashed with anger, but she stayed quiet. She was always the more calculating of the two, and I could see her trying to figure out a way out of this mess. But there wasn't one. Not this time. The two men I had brought with me, old friends who knew how to deal with situations like this, stood just a few steps behind Willa and Tammy, making it clear that any sudden movements wouldn't end well for them. The man Willa had brought looked even more uneasy, realizing that whatever he had been promised wasn't worth what was about to go down. You can still walk away from this, I said, my voice low and firm, but it ends here. No more lies, no more manipulation, and no more trying to take me out. This is your last chance. Willa's lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. But then, with a deep breath, she straightened up and tried to regain her composure. You think this changes anything? She hissed. You think just because you brought backup, we're done? I think, I said, stepping closer, that you've run out of moves. Whatever you thought was going to happen here tonight isn't going to happen. Tammy scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. You've always thought you were smarter than us, Art, but you have no idea what's coming. I stared at her, unblinking. Enlighten me. For a moment, there was silence. The night air was thick with tension, and I could see Willa's mind racing, searching for a way out. But there was no escape. Not this time. Then, from behind me, one of my friends spoke. You should listen to him, Willa. It's over. Whatever plan you had, it's dead in the water now. Willa turned her gaze to him, anger flaring in her eyes. You don't know anything about us, she snapped. I know enough, he replied, his voice calm and even. And I know you've been playing with fire for a long time. But now? Now it's time to put it out. Tammy stepped forward, her eyes locked on mine. You really think you can just walk away from this, Art? After everything we've been through? After all these years? Yes, I said simply, because I've got nothing left to lose. That was the truth. They had taken almost everything from me over the years. My family, my peace of mind, and nearly my life. But what they didn't realize was that by doing that, they had also freed me. I was no longer bound by the fear of losing what I had, because they had already stripped it away. Now, I was fighting with nothing to protect except my own survival, and that made me more dangerous than they could ever imagine. You've always been jealous, Tammy, I said, my voice hardening, always trying to undermine me, trying to take what I built. You couldn't stand that I made something of myself while you were stuck in Willa's shadow. Tammy flinched at my words, but she didn't back down. You never deserved any of it, she shouted. You're a fraud, Art. You always have been. And Willa and I, we saw through it. That's why we did what we did. You were never worthy of any of it. Worthy? I laughed bitterly. You two are the last people to talk about worth. Everything you've done has been built on lies and manipulation. You can't stand to see anyone else succeed because you're too busy tearing each other apart from the inside out. Willa's face twisted in anger. We're family, Art. You don't just get to walk away from family. That's where you're wrong, I said. I walked away from you years ago, and I haven't looked back. This is just the final nail in the coffin. Willa's jaw clenched, and I could see her fighting to maintain control. Tammy, on the other hand, looked ready to explode. But before she could say anything else, I held up my hand. This ends tonight, I said, my voice low and firm. You walk away, or you face the consequences. I don't care which. For a long moment, no one moved. The air was thick with tension, and I could see the wheels turning in Willa's mind as she tried to figure out her next move. But there was no next move. Not this time. Finally, Willa nodded, her expression cold and calculating. Fine, she said. We'll walk away. But this isn't over, Art. Not by a long shot. I didn't respond. I just watched as she turned and motioned for Tammy and the man they had brought to follow her. The three of them walked back to their car, and I stayed where I was, watching them drive off into the night. As soon as they were out of sight, I let out a long breath, the tension in my body slowly dissipating. One of my friends clapped a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, he said. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed him. Maybe. But as I stood there, watching the taillights of Willa's car disappear into the distance, I knew that this was far from over. Willa and Tammy might have walked away tonight, but they weren't finished with me. They never would be, not as long as they believed there was something left to take. The question was, how far were they willing to go? And was I prepared for what came next? The days that followed were filled with a strange sense of calm. I kept my guard up, knowing that Willa and Tammy would make their next move eventually, but for now, it seemed like they were laying low. Maybe they were regrouping, or maybe they were planning something bigger. Either way, I knew better than to let my guard down. I spent most of my time working at the garage, keeping busy and trying not to dwell on what had happened that night. But no matter how hard I tried, the thought of Willa and Tammy's next move lingered in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning something worse than anything they had done before. A few weeks later, I got a call from Josie. She had been keeping an eye on things from her end, and I had been checking in with her regularly to make sure she was safe. I trusted Josie more than anyone, and if there was anyone who could keep tabs on Willa and Tammy without getting caught, it was her. Art, we need to talk, Josie said, her voice urgent. What's going on? I asked, immediately on edge. I've been hearing some things, Josie replied. Things about Willa and Tammy. They've been talking to people in town, people who don't have your best interests at heart. I gritted my teeth. What are they up to now? It's not just them, Josie said. There's someone else involved. Someone with money and power. That caught my attention. Who? I don't know yet, Josie admitted. But I've heard rumors. They're working with someone. Someone who has the resources to help them take you down. Whatever they're planning, it's big. I clenched the phone tighter, my mind racing. What do you mean, big? I mean, they're not just trying to ruin you anymore, Josie said. They're trying to destroy you. Completely. The weight of her words settled over me like a dark cloud. I had known Willa and Tammy were dangerous, but this was something else. This was bigger than I had imagined. Do you know what they're planning? I asked, my voice tight. Not yet, Josie said, but I'm working on it. I just wanted to give you a heads up. Be careful, Art. Whatever they're doing, it's not going to be good. I will, I promised. Thanks for the warning, Josie. Stay safe, she said before hanging up. I sat there for a long time after the call ended, trying to wrap my head around what Josie had told me. Willa and Tammy had always been manipulative, always playing games. But now it seemed like they had taken things to a new level. They weren't just trying to hurt me, they were trying to destroy me, and they had found someone to help them do it. I didn't know who this new player was, but I had a feeling they were someone with real power, someone who could make my life a living hell if they wanted to. And if Willa and Tammy had found a way to work with them, I was in serious trouble. I needed to figure out who this person was, and fast. If I didn't, I knew that Willa and Tammy would succeed in their plan, and I wasn't about to let that happen. The next few days were a blur. I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities. I spent hours on the phone with old contacts, trying to dig up any information I could on who might be working with Willa and Tammy. But no one seemed to know anything. It was like this person was a ghost, moving in the shadows and pulling the strings behind the scenes. Then, one evening, I got a call from Peter. Art, I think I know who's behind all this, he said, his voice low and tense. Who? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. There's a businessman in town, Peter explained. A real estate developer named Victor Carlisle. He's got his hands in everything. Property deals, construction, you name it. But he's also got a reputation for being ruthless. If he wants something, he gets it, no matter who he has to step on to get there. And you think he's working with Willa and Tammy? I asked, my stomach sinking. I don't think it, Peter said grimly. I know it. I've been doing some digging, and I found out that Carlisle has been funneling money into a shell company that Willa and Tammy set up a few months ago. It's all under the radar, but the money's there. I closed my eyes, trying to process what Peter was telling me. Victor Carlisle. I had heard the name before. A man with a lot of money and a lot of power. If he was involved, things were about to get a whole lot worse. What do we do? I asked, my voice tight. We need to find out what they're planning, Peter said. And we need to do it fast. Carlisle doesn't play by the rules. If he's in bed with Willa and Tammy, then we're dealing with something a lot bigger than just a couple of schemers. I nodded, even though Peter couldn't see me. All right, let's figure this out. The conversation with Peter left me feeling more unsettled than ever. Willa and Tammy had always been dangerous, but now, with someone like Victor Carlisle backing them, they had become a real threat. I needed to stop them before they could put their plan into action. The next few days were a whirlwind of phone calls, meetings, and gathering information. Peter worked tirelessly to track down every lead, while I stayed in the background, trying to stay one step ahead of Willa and Tammy. We knew they were planning something, but we didn't know what. Then, one afternoon, Peter called with the news I had been dreading. They're planning to take everything from you, he said, his voice grim. Your business, your assets, everything. They've got Carlisle backing them, and they're going to use his connections to pull the rug out from under you. I gritted my teeth, feeling the anger rise inside me. How? They've been slowly buying up property around town, Peter explained. And now, they're making a move on your garage. They've already started the paperwork. If you don't do something soon, they're going to take it. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. The garage was my livelihood, the one thing I had left. And now, they were trying to take it from me. What do we do? I asked, my voice tight with frustration. We fight back, Peter said firmly. We've got to hit them where it hurts. Expose what they've been doing, and make sure Carlisle goes down with them. I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. Not without a fight. The days after my conversation with Peter were tense. The weight of the situation was heavy, and each moment felt like I was walking through a minefield. Willa, Tammy, and now Carlisle. They were all tightening their grip, and if I didn't make my move soon, they would take everything from me. I couldn't let that happen. The garage was more than just a business. It was my lifeline, the one thing I had poured my heart into since leaving the past behind. Losing it wasn't an option. Peter and I spent the next few days devising a strategy. The key was to expose them, to bring everything they had done into the light. Carlisle might have had power and money, but even men like him couldn't escape the consequences of illegal dealings, and if we could tie him directly to Willa and Tammy's schemes, it would be enough to bring the whole operation down. The challenge was figuring out how to get the evidence. Peter had already uncovered some shady financial transactions between Carlisle and the shell company Willa and Tammy had set up, but it wasn't enough. We needed something solid, something that would connect them to an outright crime. We need something that will stick, Peter had said during one of our meetings. Something that shows Carlisle's involvement goes beyond just funneling money. But finding that proof was easier said than done. Carlisle was smart, careful. He kept his hands clean while letting others do the dirty work. That's how people like him operated. But I was determined. I wasn't about to let Willa and Tammy walk away from this without paying for what they had done. As the days passed, I became increasingly paranoid, knowing that time was running out. I didn't want to show up at the garage one morning to find it boarded up, with a notice telling me it had been sold out from under me. I had worked too hard for that. One evening, while I was sitting in the kitchen, staring at the phone and waiting for Peter's latest update, I heard a soft knock at the door. I tensed immediately. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Whoever was out there wasn't a friend dropping by for a casual visit. I got up quietly, grabbed the handgun I kept in a drawer by the door, and approached slowly. Whoever it was, they weren't making any more noise. Just that one knock, and then silence. I peered through the peephole, my heart racing. Standing there was someone I hadn't seen in a long time. It was Connie. I opened the door just wide enough to see her face clearly. Her eyes were filled with hesitation and anxiety, a far cry from the confident young woman I had once known. She was holding something in her hands, and it took me a moment to realize it was a folder, thick, stuffed with papers. "Dad," she said quietly, "can I come in?" I hesitated for a moment, then opened the door wider and stepped aside, allowing her to walk in. She looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to jump out at her. I could tell that whatever had brought her here wasn't something small. I shut the door behind her and turned to face her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Connie, what are you doing here? What's going on?" She placed the folder on the table and took a deep breath before speaking. "I found something. Something about Mom and Aunt Tammy." Her voice trembled slightly, and I could see the weight of whatever she had uncovered pressing down on her. I gestured for her to sit down, and we both took seats at the kitchen table. I eyed the folder warily, already knowing that whatever was inside would change everything. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Connie pushed the folder toward me. "It's proof, Dad. Proof of everything." I opened the folder slowly, my eyes scanning the documents inside. There were financial statements, emails, and records of conversations. All of it pointed to one thing: a coordinated effort between Willa, Tammy, and Victor Carlisle to seize my business, drain my assets, and destroy my reputation. And worse, there was more. Much more. The folder contained evidence of Carlisle's involvement in criminal activities that went far beyond anything I had imagined. He wasn't just laundering money through Willa and Tammy's shell company. He was running a massive fraud operation, using local businesses to funnel illegal funds for bigger deals. "How did you get this?" I asked, my voice shaking as I sifted through the papers. Connie's face was pale. "Peter. He didn't tell me everything, but he said we needed to act fast. He's been gathering this for weeks." I looked up at her, my mind racing. This was it. This was what we needed to bring them all down. But with this kind of information, there were risks. Carlisle wouldn't go down quietly. He was too powerful, too connected. "Does anyone else know you have this?" I asked, my heart pounding. Connie shook her head. "No. Peter said we needed to be careful. If they find out we have this, it could be dangerous." She wasn't wrong. With this kind of proof, we were sitting on a ticking time bomb. One wrong move, and Carlisle's people would be all over us. But without it, we had nothing. It was a dangerous game, and we had just been handed the winning hand. But only if we played it right. I closed the folder and took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Connie, I need you to listen to me. You have to stay out of this from now on. It's too dangerous. Peter and I will handle the rest." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "Dad, I'm in this too. They've been lying to me my whole life. I can't just walk away now." I reached out and took her hand, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know, but this isn't just about lies anymore. This is about survival. If Carlisle finds out we have this, he won't hesitate to come after us. You have to trust me. Let Peter and me take it from here." Connie looked at me for a long moment, then finally nodded, wiping her eyes. "Okay, but promise me you'll be careful." "I will," I said, trying to reassure her, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. After Connie left, I sat at the table, staring at the folder in front of me. This was the kind of evidence that could take down Carlisle, Willa, and Tammy in one fell swoop. But it was also the kind of evidence that could get us killed if we weren't careful. I picked up the phone and called Peter. "Art, what's going on?" he answered, his voice tense. "I have the proof," I said, my voice low. "Everything you've been gathering. Connie brought it to me." Peter was silent for a moment. "Good. But we need to move fast. What's the plan?" I asked, already knowing that whatever came next was going to be dangerous. "I've got some people I trust working with me on this," Peter said. "We're going to take it to the district attorney. But we need to be careful. Carlisle's people are everywhere, and if they get wind of this before we can bring it to the DA, we're screwed." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "What do you need me to do?" "Keep your head down," Peter said. "Don't make any moves until I give you the all clear. And for God's sake, don't let anyone else know about this." Not until we have it in the right hands. I understand, I said, my mind already racing with the possibilities. Peter hung up, and I sat there in the quiet kitchen, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. We had the evidence, but we were walking a tightrope, and one wrong move would send everything crashing down. The next few days were a blur of tension and anxiety. I kept a low profile, avoiding the garage and sticking close to home. I couldn't afford to be seen, not while Peter was working to get everything in place. Every time the phone rang, my heart leapt into my throat, fearing it might be bad news. Finally, late one evening, the call I had been waiting for came. "It's time," Peter said, his voice calm but urgent. "We've got a meeting with the DA tomorrow morning. I need you to bring the folder." I nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settle over me. "Where do we meet?" "There's a safe house just outside of town," Peter said. "I'll send you the address. Be there at 9 a.m. sharp, and make sure no one follows you." "I will," I said, my mind already racing with the logistics. Peter hung up, and I sat back, taking a deep breath. This was it, the final move. If everything went according to plan, by this time tomorrow, Carlisle, Willa, and Tammy would be facing serious charges, and I could finally start putting this nightmare behind me. But there was always a chance things wouldn't go according to plan. Carlisle was dangerous, and Willa and Tammy were desperate. If they got wind of what we were doing, they wouldn't hesitate to stop us by any means necessary. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folder, going over everything in my mind. This was the culmination of years of betrayal, manipulation, and lies. And now, I had the chance to end it all. The next morning, I left the house early, the folder tucked safely in my jacket. I drove carefully, taking back roads to avoid being seen. I arrived at the address Peter had given me, a small, nondescript house on the outskirts of town. Peter's car was already there, parked around the back. I parked next to him and got out, my heart pounding. Peter was waiting for me on the porch, his expression tense but focused. "You have it?" he asked as I approached. I nodded and patted my jacket. "It's all here." Peter glanced around, checking the surroundings before motioning for me to follow him inside. The house was bare, just a few pieces of furniture and some boxes stacked in the corner. It looked like a place that had been used for meetings like this before, quiet, out of the way, and easy to disappear from. Inside, we weren't alone. The district attorney, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a stern expression, was seated at the table. He looked up as we entered, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took me in. "This is him?" the DA asked, his voice low. Peter nodded. "This is Art. He's the one with the proof." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folder, handing it to the DA. He opened it and began flipping through the papers, his expression growing more serious with each page he turned. "This is substantial," the DA said after a few minutes, looking up at Peter and me. "If this is what it looks like, we can bring charges against Carlisle and his associates. But you need to understand, this is going to put a target on your back." "I understand," I said quietly. "I just want this to be over." The DA nodded, closing the folder and placing it on the table. "We'll proceed carefully. Carlisle is a powerful man, and he's got a lot of connections. This won't be easy, but with this kind of evidence, we've got a strong case." Peter and I exchanged a glance. We both knew that this was just the beginning. Carlisle wasn't going to go down without a fight, and neither were Willa and Tammy. But for the first time in years, I felt like we had a real shot at taking them down. The meeting lasted another hour as we went over the details of the case and the next steps. The DA was confident but cautious, and he made it clear that we needed to be careful from here on out. There were still a lot of moving parts, and until the charges were officially filed, we were all at risk. When the meeting finally ended, Peter and I stepped outside into the cool morning air. I felt a sense of relief, but also a lingering tension. The hardest part was still ahead of us. Peter turned to me as we walked back to our cars. "You did good, Art. This is going to change everything." "I hope so," I said, feeling the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on me. "It will," Peter said firmly. "Carlisle's not invincible, and neither are Willa and Tammy. This is their reckoning." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't out of the woods yet. Carlisle was powerful, and Willa and Tammy were desperate. If they found out what we were doing before the charges were filed, they would come after us with everything they had. As I drove back home, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. But the roads were empty, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we had finally beaten them. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The DA moved quickly, filing the necessary paperwork and preparing the case against Carlisle, Willa, and Tammy. Peter and I stayed in close contact, making sure we were ready for whatever came next. Then, one evening, just as I was sitting down for dinner, my phone rang. It was Peter. "They've been arrested," he said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion. "All three of them, Carlisle, Willa, and Tammy. They're in custody." I let out a long breath, feeling the tension drain from my body. It was over. After all these years, after all the lies and manipulation, they had finally been brought to justice. "What happens now?" I asked, still trying to process the news. "The DA's building the case," Peter said. "They've got enough to keep them locked up for a while, but it's going to be a fight. Carlisle's lawyers are already trying to push back, and Willa and Tammy will do anything to avoid prison." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "But we've got the evidence." "We do," Peter said, "and it's strong. But it's not over yet. We've got a long road ahead of us." I knew he was right, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. Carlisle, Willa, and Tammy were in custody, and the wheels of justice were finally turning.